good to see everybody. All right, so we're going to pick up in lesson 2 with question 5. Yeah. So we're just going to get right into it because I don't think we're moving slow. I like the discussion and the input that everybody is giving. And I kind of designed it where I just had topics. I didn't have like, okay, we got 13 lessons, we got to hurry and get through. So I want us to make sure we take our time. The first few lessons obviously are more so about the marriage relationship in regards to the home and family. And obviously if we don't have that foundation, I don't care what your parenting style is, or I don't care how you parent, if you don't have a good marriage, then that aspect of it is not going to go well anyway. So I want to make sure that we spend enough time in discussing that, and we have thus far, and I do appreciate the input thus far. So question number 5, in what way does civil law relate to marriage? Andy?
Well, the civil law is just our laws of the land, and so just the main thing that we do in regards to marriage is we got to get a marriage license. The state or the government, wherever they set the regulations of who can be the one to officiate the weddings, and then on the flip side, then they make laws that we don't like that allow people to marry in any condition, basically, and even now marry the same sex.
Yep.
Ken, what do you think? What's the
Relation between civil law and marriage.
Well, pretty much what Andy was saying, we have to obey the laws of the land. You can't just shack up with somebody and consider them your wife or your husband, I guess. So-called common law marriage is not really legal. I guess that's about it.
So I think
and I don't know if this is a state law or if it's a national law, but in the laws that are in the eyes of the government, I don't remember if it's 7 or 8 years, it is considered legal. They consider you as married. So in the eyes of the civil authorities, it would be legal. In the eyes of God, that's not a marriage. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I think we understand, and we've talked about this here recently. I can't remember if it was in a Bible class or maybe in one of Jesse's sermons, that we are obligated to abide by the civil government. Romans chapter 13 and in verse 1 says, every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those who exist are established by God. So there are certain things that we have to abide by. God's given us that. Obviously, the civil government is a God-ordained institution, but there obviously is an exception to that rule. What's the exception to the rule? If it goes against God's will, then we know Acts 5 verse 9, we must obey God rather than man. And so I think when it pertains to marriage, yes, like Andy said, and Andy's got a little experience, a little more experience with this, with marrying. There are certain laws that you have to abide by to be considered married within the eyes of the land. And I think that those may differ depending upon what country you live in, but I think we're obligated to fulfill those. Not that is going to make a difference as far as God's laws, but we need to abide by the civil law. Now, where the breakdown is majorly is in the eyes of the law. If I don't like my wife, I can just divorce her, and then I can just go marry whoever. And obviously we know in that situation we have to obey God rather than man. And so regardless of what the laws of the land say, and regardless of some certificate of divorce that they may allow me to get to separate from my spouse, that doesn't mean that I'm no longer bound to that spouse. So there's obviously a divide there that we have to be mindful of. Jesse, did you have something? You don't have to. I just thought the way you were looking at me. It's like, go ahead, Norm. All right, while Norm's running away, I'm going to This is just a brief comment from L04 in his book. He says, God demands that his people comply with all laws enacted by civil powers. Romans 13, 1 and 2, and then also 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17. This, of course, includes marriage laws. Trobish says, so long as they are not ready to take the legal step, they are not ready to take full responsibility for each other. Responsibility calls for legality. Although legality must not be minimized, marriage is essentially complete when one male and one female commit themselves to leave father and mother, cleave to one another, and unite as one flesh. Go ahead, Norm.
A lot of the push associated with the expansion of the things that Andy was talking about, like into same-sex marriages, et cetera, is associated with the idea of the inheritance kinds of things. It gets down to, if you are a married couple now, that there are laws now that kick into place as to who can get the property, who can, and God has always had this in mind as far as you go back into the Mosaic laws and all the law of the firstborn and all these kinds of things. There was always an orderly way of moving from generation to generation. And marriage, the family, as the basic societal block, the foundation there, everything is tied through that and everything. And so this has been one of the things that has really, it's a selfish, greedy kind of outlook, basically trying to work your way in to a situation that's not designed for you. And again, there's a lot of money involved and a lot of those things that were originally supposed to be set up for a marriage as God set it up.
Any other comments on question 5? All right, question number 6. So again, I've stated this before, my intent is not to embarrass anybody. So starting off, I'm not going to ask anybody individually to answer, but if we don't get discussion, then we're all going to turn to a Song of Solomon, and we'll just read it for the rest of class. So, and I will do it. Actually, go ahead and turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We are going to read the first few verses there before we answer the question. I mean, I've talked about this. It's been, I guess it was sometime last year, we had a specific class on some of this, and I think it's, I don't know what, maybe sad that we don't want to talk about sex in regards to the marriage relationship. It's embarrassing to a lot of people. I think that God's pretty clear on the sexual relationship between husband and wife, and it's not something that we should be ashamed of, not something that we should be embarrassed to talk about. And the problem we have in our society is people aren't talking about it in the way that God talks about it. And so if we're not talking about it within the church, if we're not talking about it to our kids, they're getting it from other people, and they're getting it wrong. And so we have to make sure that we don't shy away from talking about it. And I think that we'll talk about this again in a couple of lessons with the downfall of many marriages. It's because there is a total misunderstanding of the sexual relationship. So this is something that is very, very important, and something that I think we need to make sure that we're talking about it and helping each other out. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, let's just read verses 1 through 5. Bonnie, we'll start with you, and then just work our way back, take a verse apiece.
Now concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman.
Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband.
Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband.
The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does.
Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency.
All right, so I also listed there Proverbs chapter 5, which has got some things there that it's using figures of speech to talk about the sexual relationship. And obviously Genesis 4 verse 1, it talks about Adam knew his wife. We talked about that either in the last class or the one before that, and the intimacy that is kind of involved with that. So with all of this, what role does sex play between a male and a female in the bond of marriage, or what's the purpose of sex in the marriage relationship? Norm?
Well, I'll just start off with the be fruitful and multiply, procreation. You want to have a family and a legacy and, and all that. That's the place where you do it.
Yep. That is definitely,
One of the designs of it, to be fruitful and multiply, and one of the passages that we've talked about now with our lessons in Psalm 127 talks about childbearing and the benefit of that. I saw Ken, so we'll go ahead and go to Ken.
I just wrote, I had procreation. There's several reasons for marriage, obviously. One is procreation, one is satisfaction of the human sexual need. And then I just wrote down, be satisfied with your own spouse and do not seek another. Do not deprive one another, have self-control, or get married.
okay.
Bonnie?
It's supposed to be a safeguard against temptation for one another. So we're supposed to be what each other desires. We're supposed to supply that need for one another, obviously, from this text we just read. So, and that is supposed to help prevent, each other from going off and seeking it elsewhere.
Okay.
I thought I saw another hand. Drew, I thought I saw your hand. Go ahead.
I was going to say that it's a privilege that's afforded to us in marriage.
Yeah.
No, I think that's it's actually a good word to use. It's a privilege that too often is neglected and not used properly. Norm, and then Andy.
Well, these are all the positive things about it in marriage. We have to consider the negative also, which is the destructive, very destructive nature of this outside of marriage, and the impact on the individuals that participate in that and the society in general on that. I mean, everything from disease to just attitudes, breakdown of society, where you have now just the strong are taking advantage of the weak and just preying on them. And that's been something you can see from the very beginning of mankind. One of the things that armies would do is the first thing that the armies would do is go in and rape all the women and take and just take whatever they wanted from them, because it was the strong over the weak. So again, this is God's way of saying that here's how the society should be ordered. And in fact, it takes and it softens the male and it strengthens the woman, and all of those things become in balance in the family.
Go ahead, Andy.
I was thinking about the Old Testament law there in Deuteronomy 24:5. It talks about whenever, I was almost there. When a man hath taken a new wife, he should not go out to war. So, the idea I think there that God had behind that is that, they need to stay at home for that first little time, because there's a bond that needs to be being built. So he could tell that it wasn't good for them just to, we're getting married, and then they just kind of split and go their ways. So he said, no, they need to stay at home and make this into a family.
Yeah, that might be considered the honeymoon period. But part of the problem is everybody thinks, well, okay, the honeymoon period is over. And so now my responsibilities are done, all right? We're the honeymoon period, we're through. Yeah. Other comments? Jesse?
That Hebrews 13:4 passage says marriage is honorable among all, the bed undefiled, and then hit maybe what Norm was talking about, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. So the bed is only undefiled in that relationship that God instituted from the very beginning. And since it's undefiled, it's holy. It pleases Him.
Yeah, there was a comment that I had come across just in studying this, and I had never heard it put this way, but they said we all came from sex, so we should honor it. And we did because of the way that God designed it. And I think that we read from scriptures, even there in Hebrews chapter 13, it should be something that is honorable and something that, as Drew said, it's a privilege. Norm P., did you have a comment?
It is the only thing that in marriage, few things, God restricts few things, but this is the one thing He has a specific place to which in any other circumstance is anathema. It's an abomination. Under any other circumstance, in any other relationship, man and a woman as husband and wife, this is the one and only thing that is excluded from all other relationships we will ever have. And that means it's extraordinarily important and needs to be given that kind of honor, that level of care in how you look after that. Because it is, in fact, exclusive to that. And if done properly, if done correctly, if done as God has designed, it is the most intimate you can be with any other human being. And it can take a relationship that is meant to be the most intimate to its greatest heights, if it is done properly.
Yeah, it goes back to the one flesh thing that we talked about, leave, cleave, and become one flesh. You know, just within the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, their mindset was that all things are lawful for them, and so they should be able to do whatever they want with their body and have whatever sexual relations they want, which obviously Paul condemns that thinking. And then it's almost like the exact opposite extreme with the question that they brought up, and it's like, well, all sexual relationships are bad. And so Paul, of course, is trying to help them understand this relationship and the purpose for it. And somebody mentioned it, I can't remember who mentioned it, but marriage is the proper place to fulfill the sexual desires. And God created us that way. He created us with sexual desires, and He has given us an avenue to fulfill those. And so intimacy is not just for childbearing. All right, that obviously is a part of it, but that's not the only reason. And it's not some necessary evil, which certain marriage relationships, it may come to that. If things aren't handled correctly and it feels like, okay, well, this is just something that we need to do. But one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is that this is both man and woman in the marriage, or to enjoy the pleasure of intimacy. And that's going to help, again, ward off temptation. But this isn't, Paul here, and again, we could read in the Song of Solomon, it ain't one-sided, all right? And I think we do a terrible job of not explaining this well enough, even within the church. And I think that there are girls that maybe come away from their families or come away from teachings and think, okay, well, this is just for the man. And so I just need to do this to make the man happy. That's not what we read about in scriptures. And this is just as much about the woman as it is the man. And so if that's not the way that the marriage is set up, then there's a problem. And that's not God's design. And I think that he really brings that point home in verses 4 and 5 there. And this, to me, kind of ties into our responsibilities as husbands and as wives. Because one of the things that you are agreeing to do when you marry someone is you're giving yourself over to them. They now have authority over your body. And if you're not willing to submit your body to this other person in that way in regards to the sexual relationship, then you don't need to get married. Because what you've got there is selfishness, and we're going to talk a lot about that here in a couple of lessons, but I'll just go ahead and give you a precursor. Selfishness in marriage will destroy the marriage. And there are many ways that selfishness can show itself, but it can definitely show itself within the sexual relationship. Did I see another hand? So I think sex in marriage, one, from 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2, it's a hedge against sexual temptations because it is a God-given desire that we have. I think that, secondly, it's normal and it's expected. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 3 through 5. I think that it's to be enjoyed. Something that we should enjoy. Again, as Drew said, it's a privilege. And so if you read Proverbs 5, verse 15 through 20, it's to be enjoyed. If you read the Song of Solomon, they are enjoying each other. And then lastly, too, I think that we need to make sure that sex in marriage is not used as a weapon. Because that can happen way too often too, where we use it to try and get back at our spouse, and so that is not something that we need to do, and not something that is God approved. Go ahead, Tiffany.
So I recently had a friend that I worked with she's going through a divorce, and part of their issue is he wants to have sex and she don't. Well, I've tried to explain to her that she's mad at him, right? So, and I think that, like you said, it shouldn't be used as a weapon against your spouse. Well, if you don't do that for me, then I'm not gonna have sex with you. You know, that's not what God intended at all. And so part of her issue is she was holding from him, so therefore he asked her if they could have an open marriage where he could go to whomever she says, whatever makes you happy. Well, that's not what God designed either. That's why you have a husband and the husband has a wife. Because God intended for us to fulfill each other's desires. And also, you know, whenever me and Andy were engaged and growing up in the world that we live in now, it is considered, people make fun of you.
Mm-hmm.
Because you haven't had sex with that person that you're marrying. I cannot tell you the number of people that says, well, you haven't even tested it out yet? No, I haven't. Well, don't you want to live with him first and make sure you're going to get along? Or what if you don't like it? Well, why would I love my spouse? Why wouldn't I like it? You know, that's a bond it's a special bond. And I feel like that people take that for granted. They don't look at it in that it's an honorable bond that you should share with somebody that you truly, deeply love, you know. And I just feel like nowadays it's just considered something fun to do on the side. You know, it's not considered special anymore, like God intended for it to be.
And I think both of those things that you talked about there are dangers that we have to guard against ourselves, but we also have to make sure we're teaching our children this, because that mentality, that's the mentality of the world of, okay, well, I'm going to have to take it for a test drive, you know, to see if I'm actually going to want to be with this person, again, which is not God's plan. And so the only plan that God gave us to fulfill our sexual desires is within the marriage relationship. So we're going to talk about several things, especially when we get into the next lesson, about what your responsibilities are as a husband and as a wife. And if you don't see yourself fulfilling those responsibilities, or you're questioning whether or not, I don't know if I want to have a sexual relationship with this person for the rest of my life, well, then you better not marry him. Go ahead, Isaiah, right?
What are you supposed to do if your spouse cheats? How do you go about that?
If you're already married, so we talked about this in our last lesson. So in Matthew chapter 19, God gives one reason for divorce with the ability to remarriage, and that is to remarry, and that is if your spouse cheats on you. This goes back to, I mean, even what we're talking about here, even in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and what Jesse brought up in Hebrews chapter 13. That marriage relationship is the only place acceptable for the sexual relationship, and that bond that is there. And so once one of the spouses, the husband or the wife, if they cheat and have sex with someone else and commit adultery, now God has allowed for that divorce and for remarriage. He doesn't mandate it. You don't have to divorce your spouse. I think that if it's something that you can work through and become better because of it and grow stronger, you should, especially if, when there's children involved. But God does allow for divorce and remarriage for that reason. Good question. Norm, did you have your hand up again? And it's sad. I mean, the other thing that Tiffany brought up of well, I'm going to get divorced because my husband wants to have sex all the time, and I don't want to have sex with my husband all the time. Again, that's your husband is the owner of your body, and the wife is the owner of the husband's body, and so it should not be used as a weapon. All right, go ahead, Jesse.
Then
Yeah.
he's waiting on.
Absolutely.
In all of this talk, well, your body is not your body, but your husband, and other way around, and you should not withhold. We should also remember that husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church, and therefore it's not a matter of demand, well, give it to me, it's mine, but to treat your wife as Christ would treat the church and give all of himself to her, and the same as the church needs to give all of herself to Christ, and the same as here in the marriage relationship. Well, if she doesn't like it, doesn't want it, maybe there is something that he needs to do to improve the experience. I don't know, or to have the arguments and still demand it. That's kind of weird too. Now that's just me probably.
No, I think that's an excellent
Point, and I don't want anybody to be confused, because we'll talk about this more when we talk about the husband's roles as the head of the house, and then the wife's roles, and how they all are kind of embodied with the relationship between Christ and the church. And one of the things that we'll just kind of touch on it. So obviously the wife's role is to be in subjection to the husband. The husband is the head of the house. Well, let's say that the wife isn't doing her job. I mean, it's her God-given role, but God doesn't then say, well, if she's not doing it, then you need to punish her. So that's not the husband's responsibility. And so I think that, yes, that's the wrong way of handling it if a husband or a wife is going to be demanding. What you would hope is that the relationship, the wife is going to love the husband the way that she should. The husband is going to love the wife in the way that he should. And so they're both going to have this attitude of humility and submission really to one another, to where that's not an issue. And so if you've got a situation in the marriage where the wife thinks, well, as long as he does the dishes, and as long as he mops the floors, and as long as he puts the kids to bed, and as long as he changes all the diapers, then I'll have sex with him. Okay, that's not what we're talking about, all right? But that's what happens. And so, yes, as long as all of this hinges upon the fact that the husband is going to treat the wife the way that he is supposed to, and the wife is going to treat the husband the way that she is supposed to. That's why this is so important, because when one or the other is not doing that, now you have this break, and that's when you start having these issues. And it may be other things beyond sex, but this is a big one that is used. And I think that, yes, if you've got a husband that is demanding it of a wife, that's a problem. That's not the way that it's supposed to be, and he's not loving her the way that he should. But if the wife is at the same time not having sexual relationship with her husband, that's a problem too, because she's not treating him the way that she should. Let me get Clarissa first, and then Norm.
That's where, because not everything always goes so perfectly, it's very important to go into your marriage, let's communicate any kind of feelings I might have, any kind of miscommunications, hurt. So communication has to stay open to get back on track whenever each is not fulfilling those requirements in any aspect of marriage, but especially in this most intimate form of it.
Go ahead, Mo.
Yeah. Life is not a set, where we go, oh, we got it, and we're done. It's a continuum. I can understand this as a navigator in my Air Force career, and if somebody asked me, how often was I on track, my answer was every once in a while I would cross track, all the way, but I still got to the end. But that's the way life is. We are constantly out of balance and then making decisions based on God's word that put us back in the right direction. We cross track again. And we find each other crossing tracks in a marriage. We meet each other crossing, going opposite directions, and then we correct back again. And that's that picture of that rope, that three-stranded rope that twists around each other. And that idea is that picture is there for a reason. It's not two straight lines. Two straight lines going next to each other will never meet. But it's the twisting around and stuff. So sometimes we ask too much of ourselves. Where's my perfect relationship? It's never perfect. What you are is you're correcting and constantly correcting. That takes work, and it takes paying attention.
Yeah.
Marriage is work. That is for sure. Before I get Jesse's comment, I want to make one other comment in regards to what Lena said. She made the comment about, maybe the husband's not doing it correctly. So this is where communication from parents to children, I think that this needs to be discussions that fathers have with their sons, that moms have with their daughters, because again, if we're not, they're getting on the internet and they're watching pornography or they're watching something else and they're learning wrong about what the sexual relationship is about. And this goes back to what Clarissa said and what we said at the very beginning. One of the attributes or characteristics of a godly marriage is communication. And so that doesn't mean that we're going to communicate about the house we're going to buy and maybe having children and the career, the path that we're going to have, and then we're not going to communicate about sex. No, there's got to be communication with that as well. Go ahead, Jesse.
I'm good.
Oh, you good? All right. Any other comments or questions?
Go ahead, Tiffany.
Working where I do, we work as a nurse, we have lots of other places, but you work a lot of hours, right? And unfortunately, I have witnessed people cheating on their spouses because they are at work more than they are at home. Now, I have to work. A lot of people have to work. I'm not condoning that. But if you are not at home enough to be around your spouse, then how do you expect your relationship to work? They're going to go seek attention from someone that they are around. And that happens so commonly. I have seen it happen. I have witnessed it happen. The flirting, and there are times, if you would succumb to their temptation, they would let you. And it's just sad, really. And so it's scary, honestly. It's scary and it's sad. And I would come home and tell Andy, I cannot believe just the flirting that goes on with people. It's I don't know. It's just sad. That's the only thing I have to say. It's.
And I think that ties in with our next lesson too about our responsibilities and nurturing and nourishing that relationship, and you have to make sure that you are, in fact, doing that. Norm P.
A particular challenge, especially for those that are in the service, that can be separated mandatorily for a very long time, and you're not even something that long hours, you're tired, you go to bed, but you still, at least in the same zip code. It's something that I considered prior to when I got married and before I went back into the service to be deployed, and it was, love is something that you build before you get married. Love is something that will be there long after you are no longer having sex. And love is something that if you build right, sex is an additive. It is not a foundation. And if you love so much that the other person isn't going to look anywhere else but you for that source, then when those small instances come up where you are going to be gone for a long period of time, the love will sustain you. But you've got to build that with that in mind, understanding that this has to be built so that they're not going to look for anywhere else. I'm not going to look for anywhere else, because the love is worth it. It's worth whatever weight I have to have in order to return back to it. And it's made a big difference. Myself personally, my wife has never looked anywhere else. And I do everything I can to make sure that that's always the case, that there is only one place that she needs to look to find it. Not because I'm great at bed, but because I love her so much. And if she knows that that's always a place that she can find it, then I don't have to worry about her wandering her eyes anywhere, and I don't have to worry about mine.
Goes back to the commitment.
And again, with any of these situations, if you're not willing to make the commitment, don't get married. If you're not willing to make the commitment with that particular person, don't marry that person. All right, the last question for lesson 2 is, what is the ultimate goal in a Christian marriage? Andy?
Well, whenever I think about me and Tiffany, or anybody that's married, I always go back to the 1 Peter 3:7 verse, and they're down nearly to the end of it, and it says, and as being heirs together of the grace of life. So, I mean, our husband and wife, I mean, our goal is going to be to help each other get to heaven.
Yeah. Ms. Shirley?
The ultimate goal when you start out a marriage is that you know it's for life. You know, that's what God has ordained. And you support each other in the family and home. And I think another important part is trying to help each other to get to heaven.
Yep. Other comments?
Norm?
Just the unity of action in getting yourself, your spouse, your children to heaven. I mean, that's, you got to start there. If you do anything in this world, that's one thing that you can try to do and you can focus on. And God has given us a plan and an organization within which to do it. And then however many others that you can get are just a bonus on the side.
Yeah. Okay, real quick.
Ultimate goal of a Christian in a marriage is the same as a Christian not in marriage, and that's getting to heaven. And so the ultimate goal of a Christian marriage doesn't change. If one or both are Christians in the marriage, the goal should be the same. How you get there, follow the instructions God left behind.
Yeah,
So I actually have written down, treat each other like fellow Christians. That's the first relationship we need to not forget about. We're both, as Andy brought up there in 1 Peter 3, verse 7, we're both fellow heirs of the grace of life, and we can't forget that. And I think that too many marriages fail because people were never taught really what the final goal of the marriage relationship is. And it's not that we're going to come together and, combine incomes or build wealth. It's not, coming together and so we can own a home together, or it's not even that we can raise and have successful children. These are things that we hope can happen, but the real goal of the relationship is to help each other prepare for an eternity in heaven. And when you put it in that context and in that light, I hope that we understand the gravity of the situation, that we have such a vital role in where our spouse will spend an eternity. and we can help them and we can hinder them. And so we need to not forget that our ultimate goal is to make sure that we get us and our family to heaven. Thanks, everybody.